Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of 247 DIY. We're jumping right back in here on the WRX. If you watched the previous episode, you know we went ahead and got the trunk set up all sorted out. Most of the way finalized, but not quite all the way there yet for the air ride system we're putting in on the WRX here. Not going to draw too much of an intro because I just want to jump right back in. In the beginning of the video, you saw we went ahead and got a bunch of parts painted. We pulled that rear strut bar out and we got that painted in the gold color with the end feet painted in a wrinkled black. We got our brackets painted up wrinkled black. We touched up the seatbelt brackets that we had to modify. And we got our end tank all done up in that nice color. I'm gonna let those hang probably for a couple of days. I've always gotten into bad habit in the past of painting parts really quickly and trying to go back and reinstall them, and it turns out that the paint's not quite cured enough and you end up putting fingerprints in it, or you tighten bolts down and you mess up the paint. So I'm going to try not to fall into that habit. I'm just going to let those hang for a few days, which means really all that we have to do today is install the air struts at all four corners and probably start to run some of the airline from the front and the rear wheel wells into the trunk area. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'm just going to go ahead and mark these top camber bolts with a mark to tell me what's straight up and down. I did buy new hardware and new bolts and everything to go in, but that'll just give me a rough idea of how to place the new bolts so the alignment is relatively close before I go ahead and bring this to an alignment shop once we're all done. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and start on the front, get those struts installed first before we move to the rear. The first thing we need to do is set up our leader lines. Off camera, I'm gonna go ahead and take our push to connect fitting. We're just gonna thread that on the end here. There's no need to add sealant. AirLift puts its own thread sealant on there. Once we get that on, we'll go ahead and thread it into the body of the air strut housing. So there's one all assembled. I went with AirLift's instructions for both ends of these leader lines, one into the fitting and one into the body, where you go hand tight and then you go 1 3/4 more turns. They both felt right on the edge of what I was comfortable doing, but I figured if that's what AirLift throws in their instructions, they must be confident that their materials are gonna hold up, and everything seemed to be going good. So we'll get this one installed and we'll get the other one in. All right, so that's the driver's side done. We'll go ahead and jump over to the passenger side, and I'll meet you in the rear. All right, guys, it's actually a new day. I was going to end that episode on that last bit of footage you saw, but once I got to editing, I realized that it just wasn't enough footage for one episode. I just kind of got burnt out that day. I had other things going on, and I just got to a point where I didn't want to keep working, so I was going to cut it there. Like I said, it just wasn't enough content, so it's a new day. We're back out here in the garage. I've actually done a good amount of work. Earlier this week, I got a pretty nasty head cold. 2 days ago, I felt okay enough where I just decided instead of sitting around the house, I'd come out and I would get a bunch of work done on the car. But I'm feeling better again today. I woke up super early for some reason. It's like 2 in the morning right now. I want to let my wife sleep, so I came out in the shop. Still feeling a little sick, but I'm okay to keep working here. So I'm just going to show you the work that I did. I'm actually kind of glad I didn't film it because it was that really kind of like tedious work that just gets annoying, and it would have been annoying moving the camera a million times to try to get you guys the right shot. So let me just jump in. We'll get you all caught up and show you what I got done and a little bit of what was left at the end of that video that I filmed in the outro. So let's get to it. So as you saw at the end of that last episode, we got all our struts in. I did cut it a little bit there at the end. I apologize for that, but after you saw the front, the rear is basically the same. We'll get to that in a minute. We got our strut brace back here in the top, so that's all buttoned up. We got our dampening adjusters installed here on the top. Those are in the back too. I'll show you those. And we'll start here on the front driver's side. We did pull the wheel well splash liners out for a couple of reasons. One, obviously we needed to run our air line. We'll get to that in 1 second. But the other thing, I don't think with the wheel specs that I have on there right now that we need to roll these fenders, but I'm just gonna go ahead and do it. I ordered the Eastwood fender roller, so we'll be doing that before those fender liners go in. The only thing with that is we're just going to have to figure out a solution. I know it's been done. People have talked about it on the forums, a way to get your splash guard to sit up in there nicely without flapping around, so we'll have to figure that out. But we got our strut all installed here, fresh new hardware on there. Up here, it's going to be a little dark to see. There's 2 bolts that we're sticking through right here for the master cylinder brace. And then there was 1 bolt, actually I think there was 2 bolts on the other side for a couple different things. I just kind of eyeballed how much stick out there was, took the bolts out, cut them down with the angle grinder, put them back in so they're flush with the nuts. Now in AirLift's instructions, they actually recommend taking an angle grinder and actually removing these extra captive nuts that are unused, and then even on the non-STI, just the WRX chassis, actually clearancing the fender wall a little bit. I've taken a jack and I've maxed out this airbag here. I'm sure it'll be maybe a little bit more puffed up when there's actually air in it. To me, it seems like there's more than enough clearance back there, and they did say in the instructions that really that's just if you want to run the camber all the way negative to get full camber adjustment. I'm not really trying to go for that super flush, slammed, hot boy style on this, so I don't think I'm going to need that. Worst case scenario, down the road, if it looks like that bag's getting too close to the strut tower well there, we can always just pull it out and clearance that a little bit more. Then it came to the leader lines. I really kind of looked this over quite a bit, and I really didn't know exactly how I wanted to run it. And weirdly enough, people take tons of pictures of their trunk setups when they run air, but there's really not a whole lot of pictures on how people ran their leader lines. So this is what I came up with. AirLift recommends running it the same way as the brake line, which to me doesn't really make sense because your brake line goes up underneath the body of the car. And I didn't want to run them under the body of the car. I've seen some people run them that way. It's just not how I wanted to run them. So I hard mounted the leader line up here. I did go lock to lock on the steering, and we also maxed out the strut all the way up, and it looks like I have plenty of movement in the leader line with it like this. And then our air line comes in, and all I did when we routed it up is there's actually a little notch right here in the sheet metal. So I just put some pretty thick wall vacuum hosing around the hose and just press fit it into that little notch. And then that runs down here along with my cable for my battery relocation and the hose for my washer fluid relocation. And then there's the air line there. And then that runs through this grommet here to the inside of the car. Now, this side, for whatever reason, and I don't know if it's just visually or not, it looks like there's more room between these little tabs that they make or the push pins hold your splash guard in. Again, maybe it's just a visual thing. This side didn't seem like I had to bend the line as much. The other side gives me a little bit concerned that maybe I've bent that air line a little too much, but it's definitely not kinked on the other side. So I think it should be fine. If we run into issues, I may be able to find an area further up here that I can feed through and then run it up the inside, like up underneath the dash, to have a little bit more of a shallower bend. But I think this should be fine right here. Again, I'm not going super crazy large on wheel and tire specs, so I shouldn't run into an issue of rubbing here. I know when I bought this car, the previous owner must have had a pretty large spec tire on there, because I've replaced these plastic splash liners on here because they were absolutely torn up and almost non-existent. So whoever had this car before me was definitely running at the very least 18s, if not 19s on this, because they were just tore all up. You could tell it was rubbing from the wheel. But anyway, let's jump to the inside and I'll show you how I routed the lines. All right, so we pulled this trim out all the way from the front to the rear, but up here in the front is, and I'm not going to actually be able to get the camera in there, but just behind this foam stuff right here is the other side of that grommet. It's where I ran the battery cable and the hose for the washer fluid relocation through. And then the air line you can see is right here. It's nice because there's actually, at least on the WRX, I'm not sure if the STI uses it for something, there's an open spot for like another line here, and it pops right in there. It's just about that 1/4 inch size. So it just fits right in that channel there, and then that comes right through, keeps going to the back. And then in the back, it's the same thing. You get a little bit more of that line holder there that you can use. And then right here is just where we transitioned to just keeping it tucked in on the body. But I have these like stick down zip tie mounts, and that just holds everything right up through here as we continue back into the trunk. And then back here in the trunk, we've got all 4 lines coming out here, and I started playing around a little bit with the wiring. So I've got the bulkhead connector here for the manifold pulled through. Those lines are through. Before I go ahead and lift this board up, let me show you the rear end here, and then we'll show underneath the board. So the rear, much like the front, I really kind of looked at quite a bit, hemmed and hawed on how I wanted to run this line. The good thing in the back is you don't have to worry about room for turning, obviously. You just have to worry about the up and down. So I did cycle this suspension again on this. I should have plenty of room, but what I ended up doing is there's this flat spot right up under here, which comes up in the trunk. So I just drilled a hole, and I actually ran the whole leader line right up inside the car. And then I have this self-adhesive felt that I got for a different part of this project that we're going to be using. But all I did was I just wrapped it around there till it was a nice press fit, and I squished it up in there. Because it's that self-adhesive, it should be relatively waterproof because it's got that layer of plastic backing on it with the adhesive. But again, I don't really drive this car in inclement weather anyway, so it shouldn't be a problem. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. Worst comes to worst, I could always get a rubber split grommet or something and fit that up in there, but I think I'm pretty happy with how this is right now. And then the way it sits right here on this bracket, there was a good amount of pressure the way it pushes down on this line, so I just wrapped that in more felt where it sits on the raised portions of this bracket, just to make sure there's not going to be any abrasion on this line, and that sits in there quite nicely. And I'll show you the other side. I kind of wish that I had looked at the other side first before I started this side, but I still think the other side, it wouldn't have worked if I wanted to do this side exactly like the other side. I'm happy with this side, but because of the filler neck, which I'll show you in 2 seconds, we had to do the other side a little bit different. And real quick on the front, it's basically identical to the other side, right down to the point where it comes through this grommet. It's just a little less crowded because we don't have all that coming through there. Like I said, I don't know if to you it's visually what I was talking about, but it just seems like there's less room here, and there's a little bit more of an extreme angle there. I think AirLift said don't bend it more than like a 1-inch radius, which I think I'm fine at because it actually continues. It doesn't go straight 90 into the car. It kind of continues down almost 45. So I think we're fine. I was actually a little bit surprised at just how flexible this hard plastic line was. So we're good there. And then here in the rear, if the other side was identical, that shelf would have been right about here, but you have your filler neck here, so that's not possible. I kind of overthought it. Initially, I had it set up. You can see I got to fill a couple holes because I had the leader line kind of S up like that, come down. I put one of those bulkheads I bought in there. It turns out I actually didn't end up using any of those bulkheads I bought, so a little bit of a waste of money, but I was kind of glad I had them on hand anyway. But they just don't sit flush like I thought they were going to with the 90s on there, flush to the body. But once I looked at it, I was like, man, that's just really overcomplicated. And then with it S-ing up there, it was kind of close to the bag here. I don't think it would ever touch, but it did make me a little concerned. So then I just kind of was like, well, let's just not make it so complicated. And I just drilled a bigger hole where the bulkhead was, and we ran our leader line straight into the car, similar to the other side with that felt on there to seal the hole. Again, I cycled the suspension over here. We've got plenty of room for this line to flex as the suspension goes up and down, so that should be good to go. And then back here in the trunk, you can see we just have the leader lines end up going right up underneath the board on either side, and that's just where they're going to kind of live, is right up underneath the cavity that this board creates. And then kind of the last thing I did while I was out here that day is we've got the air compressor here and the wiring that's going to come down. So some of this wiring is going to show, so I wrapped it in this fabric harness tape that I got. And then I jumped on Amazon and I got this quick connect adapter. Because basically with all of those push to connect fittings, all of those lines can be undone if I need to. I didn't want to hard mount or hardwire in this compressor. Should I ever have to take that whole board with the compressor and everything out, I can just undo the push connect fittings, I can unplug that, and then that whole assembly should come out if I ever need to service anything. Like if I need to get to the fuel pump again and everything like that, that whole thing should just lift right up out of there, no problem. And then lastly, up here in the shadows, if you can see it, we got the strut bar reinstalled. That was actually kind of a pain in the butt. It doesn't like to fit in there, to be honest with you, but we got some wiggle room and we got it back up installed there. So that's matching the front strut bar now, but now it's time to get to work. So I'm finally at the point now where I think we're ready to go ahead and carpet this, because what we need to do is start running like the wiring from the compressor, and we also need to run the drain line from the tank, and we need to run the line from the tank moisture collector over to the manifold, and that needs to be done with everything in place. So I think it's time to carpet this. So I need to get a couple things installed. We need to put the trim back in the rear here, so I know how far forward that carpet needs to go, and then we can go ahead and glue it down. Now my plan for doing that, so that I know it stays centered, is I'm going to lay it in there, put something heavy on this side, flop it over, spray my adhesive down on this side, let it tack up, flop it over this way, glue it down, then we can lift this side back over, spray the adhesive, rinse and repeat, and get that side down, and we'll get this all carpeted up. So give me a couple minutes. It's really hard to film here in the trunk, so let me just go ahead and get that done, and I'll show you the final product. Okay guys, so the board is ready to go in. I just thought I would show you where I've gotten to this point, because I got a little bit more work done. I pretty much have everything finalized with what's going to be running underneath the board that all of the accessories sit on. For starters, and I forgot to film this earlier, I ended up putting my automatic tank drain down here. I just really couldn't find a good spot up under the board like I'd want to do. Like you can see here, I made this bracket and everything, and I stuck it under there. But when I test fit it, there just wasn't enough room between the side of the spare wheel well and the spare tire. So I put it over here. It's still going to be underneath of the subfloor that I end up putting in. So you can see both lines down here. One of these is from the automatic water trap drain. That's going to come down and drain into there. And one is the automatic tank drain. Then we come over to here. We've got our emergency pressure relief valve in line. And then those lines route up over there, and we'll thread those through an opening in the board, as well as all of our tank lines here. And then we have our wiring. Now I did have to kind of cut up and modify their wiring harness a little bit, because obviously they provide a harness for like a standard vehicle whose battery's in the front, but mine's relocated in the back. So we had to split that up. So we've got the positive lead for the compressor right here, as well as the positive lead for the automatic tank drain right there. So those are both set up, ready to go when we start finalizing the wiring. And then we have the rest of our bundle here. What's nice about this kit is AirLift includes all of the connectors for height-based sensors if in the future you want to upgrade to a height-based system, which I may do. I haven't made up my mind yet. And then that comes over. We've got our plug, which will get threaded up through the board. I mounted the relay right here. It just was kind of the best location to put it. So it's just mounted right there, and the board kind of covers it. You don't really see it. And then we have our connector for the compressor right here. And then here in the back, we just took and grounded our automatic tank drain and our compressor right here on top of the ground for the battery. So all we have running to the front are these two wires, which go to our switch for the automatic tank drain, the USB for the controller, and the signal wire for the relay that goes up front to an ignition fuse. So that's all that's going to be running to the front. So with all that, let's get the board in place. We'll get our lines threaded up through, everything threaded up through, and if everything goes according to plan, and I don't see why it shouldn't, all of this mess should fit right up underneath the board and you won't see any of it. Alright guys, so there's the board all in. I realize that having them in now means that getting the side trims in, at least the way they're designed, is not really going to be possible because they do kind of hook down. But especially on this side where I have so much now being run along the bottom here, it's not going to want to sit down anyway. So I think I'm just going to trim them so that they'll slot down in, but the little foot, I guess you would call it, that's on the bottom just won't be there. It'll just slip down up next to the board here. But you can see we've got everything threaded through. So first I'm going to go ahead and throw the tank in there, get that hooked up, and I'll be back with you. So there we go guys, I kind of just went on a marathon and I got everything all installed up in there, and this is our final product. I think once the side trim pieces are in and then we get this subfloor down here in, this is going to look really good. I'm already really happy with how that looks, nice and clean with everything mounted down on there. The hardest part was this bit over here. This filter here actually ended up really close down here, so trying to get this line on here and everything to get the board in and the tank all in was kind of a pain in the butt, but that's in there now. And you can see we've got our manifold here. We just, like I said in the one video, we used these 90-degree fittings, and those all go down through there. I could have cleaned these up a little bit better, but I thought the port routing was a little different than it was, so I routed sort of different lines through the different holes in the bottom of the bracket here. But honestly, that's something no one's ever really gonna see. So outside of that, I think everything looks really good here. All that's left now is the wiring and the initial setup. So like I said, we've got our power leads over here for both the automatic tank drain and the compressor. The way I have my circuit breaker set up here, it pretty much, you can only put one battery cable in there. Nothing else really fits. So I have on order a double post battery post. Not 100% sure where I'm going to mount it right now, but it's just going to get mounted somewhere over there. So this will get cut and it'll just be a little short jumper over to the post, and then these will come up and then go on the other side of the post. So that's how that'll get wired up. And then we have our switch and our USB cable. I'm pretty sure I'm actually going to run under the carpet along the drive shaft hump there and then under the center console. So that's going to mean pulling apart more of the interior to run that up through there, but I think it's going to be cleaner than trying to run up here. And then we just have our signal wire, which we'll run up there to the front fuse box and wire that in, but that's all going to be for next episode. So that's going to do it for this episode. Be sure to stick around for the next one because that's going to be the last episode. We're going to get everything all wired up, get everything set up with the controller and everything, get it aired out, and see how it looks. So as always, if you guys like the video, be sure to hit that like button. Feel free to leave a comment below, and if you're not subscribed already, please consider subscribing. Thanks.